41 minutes. That is the window. But inside those 41 minutes, there is a 14-minute gap that does not match up. And if you understand what happened in those 14 minutes, you understand everything about who took Nancy Guthrie. Stick with me, because this gets really strange. 1:47 in the morning. That is when her doorbell camera went dark, covered by someone wearing gloves. 2:12. Motion was detected inside the house. And 2:28, that is when her pacemaker stopped sending signals to her phone. 41 minutes from the moment the camera died to the moment her heartbeat went silent. But the question that is keeping the FBI up at night is not what happened during those 41 minutes, it is what happened inside the narrower window. 14 minutes between the motion and the disconnect. That detail changes everything, because in those 14 minutes, an 84-year-old woman who could barely walk 50 yards on her own was removed from her home. Nancy Guthrie is 84. She lives alone in the Catalina foothills outside Tucson, Arizona. She has limited mobility, she relies on daily medication to stay alive, and she wears a pacemaker that sends her heartbeat data directly to her iPhone every single second of every single day. On January 31st, 2026, her family dropped her off at home after dinner at approximately 9:30 in the evening. That was the last time anyone in her family saw her alive. The following morning is Sunday. Nancy did not appear for her regular virtual church service. A friend called the family because something felt wrong. By noon, they were at her house. Her phone was there on the counter. Her wallet was sitting exactly where she left it. Her medication, the medication she needs every single day just to breathe, still in the same spot. But Nancy was not anywhere in that house. Deputies arrived at 12:15 in the afternoon, and the moment they walked inside, they knew this was not a missing person case. This was something far worse. There was blood, drops of it on the front porch, and traces inside the home. The sheriff said publicly that he believed she had been taken against her will, possibly in the middle of the night, and that she did not leave that house of her own choice. The FBI joined within days. On February 10th, they released doorbell camera footage, a masked individual on Nancy's porch in the dead of night, a man in a ski mask and gloves with a holstered handgun and a 25-liter Ozark trail backpack. He was caught on camera covering the lens with vegetation, neutralized the entire security system in seconds. And that is where everyone stopped looking. That grainy image of the masked man became the entire narrative. 8 weeks. Every news outlet focused on him. Every investigation centered on finding him. But something did not feel right to the FBI. That is when things changed. That is when they started asking a completely different set of questions, not about the masked man, but about a vacant house that emptied out weeks before Nancy disappeared. Questions about every single contractor and construction worker who had been near her home in the weeks leading up to the night she vanished. Questions about an evening on January 11th that no one thought to question until it was far too late. And that is where the real investigation actually begins.
The vacant house was 2 blocks away. No one paid attention to it at first. Vacant properties in affluent neighborhoods are common. People sell, people move. Properties sit empty between owners. But the FBI asked neighbors something very specific. When did it empty out? Who was working there? And crucially, who had access to it in the weeks before Nancy disappeared? Something does not add up about that line of questioning. The FBI does not ask about a random vacant house unless they believe that house is connected to the crime. And if it is connected, it means the people who took Nancy used it or planned to use it. Think about that for a moment. If you are organizing something this precise, something that requires knowing the layout of Nancy's home, her schedule, her medication timing, her camera placement, you need a location where you can coordinate, where you can plan, where you can move without being noticed. A vacant house accomplishes all of that. The investigation began to show something very different from the masked man narrative. Contractors had been in the area, construction crews, workers coming and going, normal activity, routine activity, the kind of activity that does not trigger suspicion because it fits the pattern of a neighborhood where renovation and maintenance are constant. But here's the problem. If you are trying to learn the layout of someone's home, their security vulnerabilities, their schedule, the best way to do it is to blend into that normal activity. You do not need to hide. You need to be visible as part of the landscape. Neighbors do not question construction workers. They do not ask contractors for identification. They do not remember faces of people wearing hard hats and carrying tools, because those people belong in that context. Someone could approach Nancy's house, could test the doors, could check the windows, could cover the camera, could study the alarm system, and no one would think twice because the narrative would be clear. They belong there. They are part of the crew. The FBI started asking about names. Every single contractor who worked on properties near Nancy's home in January, every worker who was seen in that neighborhood, every vehicle that parked on those streets. What happened next was unexpected because the investigation did not focus on finding the masked man. The investigation started narrowing on the weeks before the mask ever appeared, on the preparation, on the invisible reconnaissance that no one noticed in the moment. January 11th, 20 days before Nancy disappeared, something happened that evening. The FBI is asking about it now, but on January 11th, it felt like nothing. A neighbor's dogs barking, a figure near a property, a vehicle parked where it does not usually park. These details feel insignificant when they happen. They are the texture of a normal evening, but they become critical only after something terrible follows. And that is what the FBI believes, that on January 11th, someone was testing Nancy's home, not in a way that would trigger alarms, not in a way that would seem criminal, but in a way that would answer a question. Can we get inside? Can we do this without being noticed? Can we access her home when she is asleep? The behavioral pattern that emerges is not the pattern of someone desperate or impulsive. It is the pattern of someone patient, someone confident, someone who has done reconnaissance before. Suspicious activity often looks ordinary in the moment. That is the feature, not a bug. That is how you make something invisible, not by hiding it, but by making it normal. And that is precisely what made this operation effective. The question that the FBI is circling around is deceptively simple. Who spent 3 weeks learning Nancy Guthrie's home? Who tested her security? Who studied her schedule? And most importantly, who had the knowledge and the access and the confidence to believe they could do all of that without being caught? Because if someone spent that much time preparing, that much time learning, that much time planning, then Nancy Guthrie was not a random target. She was a calculated one. And that changes everything about what this investigation actually is.
Nancy Guthrie was a pacemaker. That pacemaker is not just a medical device, it is a tracking system. Every heartbeat, every moment, every second of her life, that pacemaker sends data to her iPhone. Her family can see it, her doctor can see it, and if someone knows how to access it, they can see it too. Think about what that means. If you are planning to take someone from their home in the middle of the night, knowing the exact moment they fall asleep is valuable, but knowing the exact moment their pacemaker stops transmitting is something else entirely. That is knowledge. That is confirmation. That is proof of execution. 1:47 in the morning, the doorbell camera goes dark. Someone covered it with vegetation. Gloved hands, professional, no hesitation. 25 minutes pass. 2:12 in the morning, motion is detected inside the house. Movement, activity. Someone is moving through Nancy's home. 16 minutes later, 2:28, the pacemaker stops sending signals. And that is the moment everything becomes real. That is the moment Nancy Guthrie ceases to exist in any digital sense. Her heartbeat no longer transmitting, her location no longer trackable through medical data. She has been disconnected. But here is the problem. That timeline is not random. It is too precise. 2:12 to 2:28 is not enough time to forcibly remove an 84-year-old woman from her home and get her to a vehicle if she is resisting, if she is fighting, if she is struggling. 2:12 to 2:28 is 16 minutes. That is barely enough time to get her out of bed, out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and out the front door if she is moving willingly. But if she is resisting, if she is struggling, if someone has to carry an elderly woman who weighs 120 pounds or more, that timeline does not add up, unless she knew who it was. Something does not feel right about that possibility, because if Nancy knew her abductor, if she went with them willingly, even under threat, that means this was not a random home invasion by a masked stranger. It means someone she trusted was in her home that night, someone close enough to be let inside without force, or someone with keys, or someone with alarm codes, or someone who understood her well enough to predict how she would react. A compliant victim moves faster than a resistant one. The timeline is telling a story that the FBI has been quietly investigating for weeks. The pacemaker data raises another question. Who knew the exact moment to move? Because if someone can access Nancy's medical data in real time, if they can see her heartbeat through her iPhone syncing, they don't need to guess when she is asleep. They don't need to wait and listen for sounds from the bedroom. They can see the pattern. They can see when her heart rate drops, when her body is resting, when she is most vulnerable. And they can time the operation down to the minute. This is where things start to feel off, because accessing a pacemaker remotely requires specific knowledge, medical knowledge, technical knowledge, knowledge of how these devices work, knowledge of how the apps function, knowledge of the passwords and permissions required to sync that data. That is not the profile of someone who covers their face with a ski mask and gloves and knocks on a door. That is the profile of someone who understands systems, who understands technology, who understands vulnerable points in security architecture. The FBI has been quiet about whether they believe the pacemaker was hacked. They have been quiet about whether they think someone accessed Nancy's medical data without authorization. But the questions they are asking suggest they are looking at that possibility. They are asking about who had access to her phone, her home network, her medical devices, her passwords. They are asking about caretakers and family members and anyone who spent time in her home. And that line of questioning reveals something crucial. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a crime of information. The 14-minute window becomes even more mysterious when you understand what the FBI knows. If someone had access to Nancy's pacemaker data, they knew exactly when she was vulnerable. They knew her schedule better than she did. They knew her routines, her medication timing, the moments when she would be asleep and defenseless, and they can time the operation down to the minute. And that makes the execution precise, made it quick, made it efficient. A 14-minute window is all you need if you have planned every second, if you have studied every detail, if you have eliminated every variable except one, the variable of whether she would resist, and the timeline suggests she did not. What happened next was silence, and that detail changes everything, because silence is not empty. Silence is full of information, if you know how to read it. 10 hours passed between the moment Nancy's pacemaker went silent and the moment her family realized she was gone. 10 hours. No alert, no system flagged the disconnection. No one checked on her. For 10 hours, Nancy Guthrie could have been anywhere, and the people who took her had a 10-hour head start. That is not a small detail. That is a massive window for movement, for distance, for preparation of whatever comes next. Multiple ransom notes started appearing. News outlets received messages demanding millions in Bitcoin. Millions. Specific amounts, specific wallets, specific instructions. The notes sounded urgent. They sounded threatening. They sounded like a kidnapping. But something does not add up about that narrative. If you were organized enough to case a house for 3 weeks, if you were patient enough to plan an operation this precise, why would you send ransom demands that can be traced? Bitcoin is not anonymous. Every transaction is recorded on a blockchain. Every wallet can be tracked. Every transfer leaves a digital footprint that leads directly back to you. The FBI has never confirmed that those ransom notes are authentic. That silence is significant, because if the FBI believed those notes were real demands from Nancy's abductors, they would say so. They would coordinate with financial institutions. They would track the wallets.
But instead, the FBI has remained silent on whether those demands are genuine or misdirection, and that silence suggests the FBI believes the ransom narrative is a lie. Which raises the question, if this was not about ransom, what was it about? What do you think really happened here? Because the more you look at the pieces, the less the official narrative holds together. Theory 2 emerges from the characteristics of the operation itself: a crew with multiple people, precision timing, medical knowledge, the ability to coordinate across time and space. These are not the hallmarks of a random criminal. These are the hallmarks of a trafficking ring. Someone did not kidnap Nancy Guthrie on impulse. Someone planned it with the specificity of a business operation. Trafficking operations work this way. They case targets, they test security, they recruit people for specific roles. One person covers the camera, another moves through the house, another waits at a vehicle, another drives, another manages the location where the victim is taken. It is organized, it is compartmentalized, it is designed so that if one person gets caught, the others can continue operating. But Nancy is 84 years old. She has limited mobility. She requires daily medication. She is not a typical trafficking victim. Trafficking targets are usually younger, usually stronger, usually easier to transport and control. So the question becomes darker. What if Nancy was not the target? What if Nancy was leverage? What if someone in Nancy's life, someone close to her, someone connected to her, was the actual objective, and Nancy was insurance? Insurance against non-compliance, insurance against attempts to contact authorities. That would explain the precision, that would explain the planning, that would explain why someone spent 3 weeks preparing. Because if you are taking leverage, you cannot afford mistakes, you cannot afford resistance, you cannot afford anything that brings attention. And an 84-year-old woman in a wheelchair or struggling to walk is not easily moved, unless she trusts the person moving her, unless she believes she is going somewhere safe, unless her mind tells her that cooperating is the only option. The FBI has not released any proof of life, no photos, no videos, no messages from Nancy herself. 8 weeks and nothing. That silence is behavioral evidence, because kidnappers who want ransom typically provide proof that the victim is alive. They provide photos with dates, videos with timestamps, messages from the victim. These prove the kidnapper actually has the person and will release them if demands are met. But Nancy's abductors have provided nothing. That suggests they never intended to release her. That suggests proof of life was never part of the plan. But here's the problem with the trafficking theory. It assumes outside expertise. It assumes a crew of multiple people, precision timing, medical knowledge, the ability to coordinate across time and space. But what if the expertise was not outside? What if the knowledge came from inside? What if someone who had access to Nancy's home, someone who had seen her routines, someone who understood her vulnerabilities because they lived near her, or cared for her, or worked for her, what if that person organized this? What if the masked man on the doorbell was just the visible part, and the real criminal was someone whose face would never appear on camera because that person had already been inside 1,000 times before? The January 11th visit takes on a different meaning in this context. What if it was not reconnaissance by strangers? What if it was someone testing how Nancy would react, how quickly she would comply, whether she would resist or cooperate? What if that evening was an audition, an evaluation, a rehearsal for what would happen 20 days later? This is where things start to feel off in a way that the other theories do not explain. Because this theory requires betrayal. It requires trust violated. It requires someone close enough to Nancy to understand her completely. And that's a different kind of monster than a masked intruder. That is a monster who smiled at her, who she knew, who she allowed into her home.
The FBI cleared the family publicly. Let that sink in for a moment. When law enforcement clears someone, it does not mean they are confident that person is innocent. It means they have eliminated them from active suspicion through evidence. It means they know where that person was, what they were doing, and that alibi checks out. But public clearance is strategic. It is designed to redirect suspicion away from the people closest to the victim. It is designed to say, "We have looked there, and there is nothing there. Move along." But what about the people who are not family?
caretakers, medical professionals, workers who come and go from Nancy's home, people with regular access, people who know her schedule because they manage her appointments, people who know her medication because they help her take it, people who have seen her routines repeated so many times that they could predict her movements in the dark. Those people were not cleared. Those people were questioned, and the FBI is still asking about them. Something does not add up about how quickly the narrative shifted from outside threat to inside knowledge, because a masked man on the doorbell camera requires no insider help. A masked man can cover a camera and break down a door. A masked man can commit a home invasion, but a masked man cannot predict exactly when an 84-year-old woman is asleep, cannot know the layout of her bedroom, cannot move through her home without hesitation, cannot know where her medication is stored or that her pacemaker data syncs to her phone unless someone told him. And that someone would have to know these details intimately, would have to be trusted enough to observe without raising suspicion, would have to be close enough that their presence in the home was normal. But what if the entire framework is wrong? What if the masked man and the ransom notes and the trafficking operation and the inside conspirator are all misdirection? What if someone orchestrated all of these narratives simultaneously, knowing that investigation would split its focus? Knowing that law enforcement would chase ransom demands while trafficking experts would analyze the operation, while detectives would question family members, and while everyone was looking in every direction at once, the actual truth would remain hidden in plain sight. This is where things become deeply unsettling, because that level of misdirection requires understanding of how law enforcement thinks, how investigation works, how different agencies respond to different scenarios. The masked man created a visual narrative that everyone could latch onto. The ransom notes created an economic motive that seemed obvious. The precision of the operation suggested trafficking professionals, and the questions about the vacant house and January 11th suggested an inside player. Every clue pointed somewhere different, and that is not a mistake, that is strategy. The behavioral psychology of someone this careful is worth understanding, because this is not the mind of someone desperate or impulsive. This is the mind of someone who has thought through every angle, every response, every possible investigation avenue. Someone who understands that confusion is a form of control, that noise drowns out signal, that if you give investigators 10 different directions to follow, they will chase all 10 simultaneously and catch nothing. The preparation speaks volumes about the perpetrator's confidence. 3 weeks of planning, testing on January 11th, studying the home, understanding the security. That is not the work of someone committing a crime of passion. That is the work of someone who believes they are invisible, who believes the operation is airtight, who believes the misdirection is effective enough that they will never be caught. That confidence tells you something crucial about who this person is. They have done this before, or they believe they can do this, and they're betting their freedom on the idea that everyone looking will see the masked man and stop looking. The 14-minute gap becomes even more significant when you understand the psychology behind it, because that gap is not a void. That gap is where the actual crime exists, not the visible part with the camera and the gloves and the mask, but the invisible part. The part that requires knowledge only someone inside could have. The part that requires planning. The part that requires understanding how an 84-year-old woman would react, how she would move, whether she would scream or comply or recognize a voice from somewhere in her past. What happened in those 14 minutes reveals the operational knowledge of whoever planned this, because every second was accounted for, every movement predicted, every contingency considered. Someone knew that if motion started at 2:12 and the pacemaker data needed to stop at 2:28, there was a specific sequence of events that had to occur. Get her out of bed, move her through the house, get her to the vehicle, drive to the next location, disable or disconnect the pacemaker, and disappear into the night before anyone woke up. The silence that followed for 8 weeks is the loudest part of this entire case, because silence means control, and control means the person taking Nancy had no fear, no urgency, no need to rush or make mistakes or contact anyone. 8 weeks of silence suggests someone sitting quietly, waiting, knowing that the investigation is chasing its own tail, knowing that the misdirection is working, knowing that while everyone is focused on ransom demands and vacant houses and construction workers, the actual answer remains hidden in the details that no one thought to question.